Hello, this is Archie Dunlop with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, May the 3rd, 2023. A long time ago, I wrote a book, and this book was called Life, Love and Destiny. Rather, I co-wrote the book. And it was supposed to be a primer on astrology that anyone could use to learn the subject. I think it was published in 1994. And one of the sections of the book, I talked about Capricorn, and I wanted to give an illustration of typical Capricorns, or rather hyperbolic Capricorns, really Capricorns that seem to really emphasize Capricorn traits in an almost exaggerated way. And so I chose three Capricorns. I thought, well, President Nixon, Watergate, quite a power player. Yeah, Nixon, typical Capricorn. Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao. Another Capricorn. Yeah, typical Capricorn. Launched for Chinese Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, transformed China. Another Capricorn. For my third Capricorn, I chose Stalin. I thought Stalin was a typical Capricorn. We all know what he did in the Soviet Union, how he gradually climbed to the top, how he used a relatively humble position to leverage his power, being General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He was, to begin with, just in charge of membership, but somehow he was able to transform the position. And so this was all published, Stalin the Capricorn. And then I found later that actually Stalin was not a Capricorn. And I was gutted to find that out. He was actually a Sagittarius. So perhaps we should think about other famous Russians. What is their star sign? Ivan the Terrible. Can you guess his star sign? There's a story about Ivan the Terrible, which it's not true, by the way, but it's still a good story, that he was looking at a church that his architect had just built. And he was really pleased with his church. It was a great church, one of those Moscow, I don't know, was it a cathedral in Moscow or something? Anyway, he was looking at his church and he said to his architect, could you build me another one like that? And the architect thought about it and said, yeah, he probably could. So Ivan Terrible promptly had his eyes plucked out or had him blinded, because he just didn't want the possibility of this perfect church he was looking at being replicated. So, yeah, surprise, surprise, Ivan the Terrible was a Virgo, though I don't think that story is true. But nonetheless, it seems to illustrate a Virgo trait, wanting perfection. You don't want to think that something might be better than what you've already got. So as far as other star signs are concerned, Catherine the Great, she was she was famous for a number of things, but she was famous also for her voracious sexual appetite. Loads of lovers. I think she had them killed if they were no good, and there were bizarre rumours about her and a horse. I don't think that was true. But yeah, she was a Taurus, and so that she was perhaps showing the sensuality of the sign Taurus. She was also a major power player. She really helped expand Russia. A lot of the Ukraine at the moment was the reason it used to be Russia. It was Catherine the Great that was responsible for taking a lot of that stuff. So there's Catherine the Great. She was a Taurus. What about others? The current leader, Putin, is a Libra. Librans, they like to compromise, whatever. Putin's got a lot of criticism in Russia, I think, for the way he's conducted the war, for being too reasonable, for trying to negotiate, for trying to think about all points of view, trying to avoid civilian casualties. Yeah, I know that in the West you don't see it like that, but that's how his many critics in Russia view him as being a Libra, not just trying too hard to be friends with everyone. And I know that it's completely at odds with the Western narrative about Putin. So who else is there? Yeltsin was an Aquarius, one of the worst Russian leaders. The sun doesn't work very well in Aquarius. It's in its detriment in Aquarius because it rules Leo. Gorbachev was a Pisces, and Peter the Great. Apparently, Putin has a great admirer of Peter the Great, and Peter the Great was a Gemini. I mean, I don't know much about Peter the Great. I did actually write an essay on Peter the Great when I was doing my history A levels in England a long, long time ago. But I think he had a certain versatility. You'd need a certain versatility to expand westwards. He liked modern things. Geminis do like modern things. And another Gemini who is not a mainstream Russian leader is the head of Wagner private military contractors, Wagner PMC, which is a kind of a private army that is working with the Russians in their war in the Ukraine, and who has really taken, in the Battle of Bakhmut, it's what Wagner PMC that has taken the lead there, and seems to be largely, responsible for taking out, or slowly, they seem to almost finish with Bakhmut, but not quite. So what I thought we'd do is actually look quickly at the head of Wagner PMC's horoscope. So let's look at his. Let's look at his chart. I'm not going to spend long on it. So, Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of Wagner PMC. He made his money from hospitality. Apparently, he was born on June the 1st, 2023. So, he's going to be. No, that's not right. That's his solar return. Sorry, June the 1st, 1961. We don't know his time of birth, but he was born in Leningrad, St. Petersburg now, and this is his horoscope. Now, he spent a long time in prison at the beginning of his life. For that, I don't know quite what for, but I think for various acts of theft and so forth. Then he found he was very good at selling hot dogs, and then after that he didn't stop, and he became an oligarch, and then he turned his attention to running Wagner PMC. Although he's head of Wagner PMC, he's not like a general or anything. I'm not even sure if he was in the Russian army. So let's look at his horoscope quickly. What are the main themes? He says a lot. He's always saying things. He's critical of Russia. He's critical of his own government. He complains about not getting enough weapons. He's sometimes kind of pessimistic. He denies reports that they've captured a place. And so I think that's Sun in Gemini. I think we're seeing his Sun in Gemini there. Geminis do talk a lot. On the other hand, he has a moon in Capricorn, and Sun in Gemini, moon in Capricorn, two completely different energies. Moon in Capricorn is not the greatest sign for the moon to be in terms of being warm and fuzzy and sentimental and all that. Moon in Capricorn is very focused on its own interests. So money is important. He wants, he looks after his own. He looks after his own interests. And so I suppose if you want to be a Russian oligarch, I suppose having a moon in Capricorn is quite a good thing. What else? So you can see that he's got a very wide Mars-Uranus conjunction. I wouldn't really treat that as being a conjunction because it's just too wide. It's 8 degrees apart. So that, yeah, you might say, oh well, that fits the fact someone who's involved in an army. By the way, it's interesting. People seem to think that Russia is communist and socialist and all this kind of stuff. Of course, it's not. The Russian communism finished a long time ago. But some people are still, when they look at the Ukraine war, they somehow still think they're fighting communism. But here, at least in Russia, you actually have private armies, kind of. I know it's not completely private, but you have a private organization running an army, which wouldn't happen in the West. Kind of the West is more socialist than Russia now, because the Russia armies are run by the government, controlled by the government. You don't have private people, private contractors in running armies in the West. But in Russia, which has moved so far beyond communism, you could argue, that you now have private contractors running armies. In the West, you only have private contractors, I don't know, running hospitals and that aspect of government. So that's just an interesting point. But the Mars-Uranus conjunction is about, it's a very wide conjunction. It's about massive force, bombs, explosions, guns, all of this. So it's a wide conjunction. But if you look, Mercury is 45 degrees from the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And perhaps that says something about the way he communicates. He has a very explosive way of communicating. Perhaps he likes talking about guns, explosions and whatever. Maybe that makes it, he finds that mentally stimulating. And so perhaps that's why, as a Gemini, Geminis like to be mentally stimulated. And that Mercury in Cancer, on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, he's perhaps mentally stimulated by the idea of running his own private army. And that Mercury in Cancer is a very patriotic sign. So perhaps he patriotically describes what he's doing for Russia by running his private army, and perhaps that fits Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, or maybe I'm just looking at his chart with 2020 hindsight. One final thing about his horoscope is the relationship between Mars and Saturn. I think the problem that many people have with astrology is that they don't really have access to programs that can calculate midpoints. Midpoints to me are really important. But if you look at this, there's Saturn at 29 Capricorn. There's Mars at 14 Libra. So you could say, well, Mars and Saturn have a very, very wide opposition. I mean, it's not an opposition, it's too wide. But Jupiter is around 7 or 8 degrees from the conjunction with Saturn, and it's about 7 degrees from the opposition with Mars. So what that means is that Jupiter is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, Antony Blinken, American Secretary of State, had Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And when I talked about his horoscope, I thought that maybe he really got off on violence. He got off on killing Russians. I suggested that maybe it's not true. But, Antony Blinken is a major warmonger who's really pushing for the continuation of this war between NATO and Russia. And in the same way, Prigozhin seems to be really getting off on violence. Jupiter is what makes you feel good. It's your ability to expand, and he's expanding through the Mars-Saturn principle. Mars-Saturn is about death and destruction. So through what's going on in Bakhmut, perfect with Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. This town getting destroyed, Ukrainians getting absolutely hammered in Bakhmut. I don't buy what the West is saying when they're saying that more Russians are being killed Bakhmut from the Ukraine. I think it's the opposite, but that's just my view. But Prigozhin is really getting off on it. Prigozhin goes to Bakhmut, even though he's not a soldier. He's just a oligarch running his Wagner PMC. Yeah, he's getting off on it, and that's probably not very healthy. But anyway, that's perhaps why he so likes his Wagner PMC, why he finds it such perhaps a culmination of his life. Of course, he does have to be careful because Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn can be a quick death. He's just having fun somewhere on the front, and then a Ukrainian artillery shell lands on him, and that's the end. I mean, that would be Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but he just has to be a bit careful, I think, with that. But at least his death will be quick, according to the astrological theory. Anyway, so having done that, let's look at stars for today, Wednesday, May the 3rd, 2023, as usual. This chart you're looking at has been set for midday in New York, simply for convenience. Not a great deal going on. The moon continues to be in Libra. Notice that it's now in the Via Combustor. The Via Combustor is between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. And so when the moon goes into Via Combustor, and it's into the Via Combustor, and it spends a couple of days here, it's a time where anything can happen, where we think we've sorted everything out, and then we haven't. Our plans get destroyed. So, it happens every month. It's not a big deal. So we have to be a little careful with that. Then the moon moves to make a square with Mars. So it could be quite an angry day, particularly towards the end. Particularly if you're in Europe, and if you're in New York, you don't get the full hit of that moon Mars until maybe the early evening, even later if you're on the Pacific coast. But there is a bit of anger at the end of the day if you're in America, a bit earlier on if you're in Europe or Asia or Australasia. So yes, we must be careful how we deal with our anger. I think that's really important. Just petty annoyances should be, we don't have to make a big fuss about it. But there's something more serious going on today, which probably a lot of astrologers just wouldn't pick up on. I mean, that's not because I'm brilliant. It's because I'm into midpoints and I'm into 45-degree angles and so forth. So if you look at Mars, it's 2028 Cancer, and Saturn is at 536 Pisces, and you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? The big deal is they are exactly 135 degrees apart. So 135 degrees is 3/8 of a circle. So imagine you've got a cake and you've cut it into 8 slices of 45 degrees. 135 represents 3 slices. And that's an exact hard aspect. So it's a day of frustration. It's a day when we have to be careful. It's a day perhaps when there could be accidents, when there could be, in extreme situations, death and destruction. And matters are made worse by the fact that the sun, if you look at the sun, it's at 12 Taurus. The sun is exactly on the midpoint of Mars and Saturn. So, the sun being on the midpoint of Mars and Saturn perhaps isn't a big deal. But it's more of a big deal when Mars and Saturn are also in have this 135-degree aspect. So we have to be really careful today. And I think there could be some bad news, something relating to Mars, Saturn, death, destruction. I'm going to look at my favorite book, Alfred Witter's and Friends. Ludwig Rudolph, the Hamburg School, wrote the book. What does it mean when Sun is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint? So let's get it from the horse's mouth. Death, sickness, personal difficulties. How's that? Let's have a number something else. That's Reinhold Ebertin, in combination of stellar influences. This is one of the most important books in astrology. If you don't have it and you're into astrology, you should have it. Mars-Saturn, Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Weak vitality, the inability to meet all demands or to master all situations, the necessity to overcome illness, the illness or the death of members of the male population. And that is because the Sun is a male planet. It's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So death of members of the male population. You certainly wouldn't want to be in Ukraine or right now, or the Sudan or anywhere. But you wouldn't want to be in a war zone with Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for this particular stars for today, and I will now do my quick daily readings for the 12 signs. Aries, 2 stars. Struggles are building up, arguments are waiting to break out. Taurus, 3 stars. You can count on the support of the people who matter. Gemini, 3 stars. Amusement could have a high cost. Quit while you're ahead. Cancer, 2 stars. Your strident approach could cost you friends. Leo, 3 stars. Messages run to and fro, but dark thoughts could cloud the day. That's because Sun, ruler of Leo, is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Virgo, 4 stars. Money requires a firm hand, but your command of the details should see you through. Libra, 5 stars. Sometimes you have to choose sides. The middle of the road is for drunks and roadkill. Scorpio, 2 stars. Hidden information could disrupt travel plans. 3 stars. You can't achieve your hopes and wishes without a struggle. Yeah, that's Sagittarius, 3 stars. Capricorn, 2 stars. At work, you have to deal with troublesome individuals. Aquarius, 3 stars. Rise above the surrounding chaos. And finally, Pisces, 2 stars. The surface details tell you nothing. So now I'm going to move to my I Ching reading, and the first hexagram I get, remember, of this reading is for you who's looking at this YouTube channel. For Wednesday, if you're not looking at this YouTube channel, it doesn't apply to you. Somehow, if you've blundered into this channel and you're still here and you're looking at me and it's Wednesday, yeah, this applies to you. But if you don't like it, you can take it or leave it. So the first hexagram is 59, which is dispersion. In general, dispersion is not a great hexagram. It's about things having to be cleared out. It's just things aren't right, and they have to be, it's also connected with the rain. So if it's raining a lot, the rain clears away the toxins and the disease and everything that needs to go. But while it's happening, it's perhaps not very pleasant. And what we get at the end today, it may feel that there's a fever. I don't literally mean fever. I'm talking about it symbolically. Just something not right, and it's getting worse, and it hits a peak. And then it's like at the peak of the problem, there's an inspiration. We feel we know what needs to be done. And suddenly the situation completely reverses. And we move from dispersion to hexagram number 59 to hexagram number 50, the cauldron. And the cauldron, the symbolism of the cauldron is you're using wood to heat something up, and you're having to use the material world to elevate the situation, because you need to burn stuff, you need to burn wood. And so this is a situation where we can completely expand upon our existing situation and move into something very different. Indeed, we can touch the divine and bring it down to earth and make it part of part of our reality. So in terms of the I Ching, I think it's a day that starts not very well, but as it progresses, gets better and more inspired, and in the end, we can do something really special. So that's all I'm going to say today, and I will talk to you tomorrow.